mark. I don't understand well carbon market. This is the first. The second, carbon market, is it working or it is still in planning? Thank you.
I think you can answer all questions at once. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Shema. Thank you, Yassine, for a good presentation. Is like something I want to add. I did it's like a training about carbon credit. The challenge we still have is that even there is a trees, we have to plant trees and they make a forest, but for absorbing CO2, the trees are very different. So there are some research that we are doing to the native trees, as Nicholas said. Those native trees, it will take long to grow. It will take more than 10 years and 20 years, but are good to absorb more compared to exotic trees. And the other thing is that to the stage of the trees, there is some carbon, CO2 that it's absorbed. It means if you get those contracts with the people who will buy those credits, it means even in two years, you will start getting, put it on the market and get money. Tell them that you have to wait until 8 years or 10 years to get much money. He don't understand it. The second thing is that the contracts are not clear because there is someone who come and using as remoting sensitive to measure all the things. But as a community, I will not be sure that the amount you are telling me is true. I will say there is some things. And then we really need to get more trainings, especially for stakeholders, NGOs, and others to be aware of
carbon credit market and climatic change. When we say carbon credit market is technique used to reduce climatic change, where developed countries that have a large industry to give money to that developing countries, that carbon dioxide will be captured in these local or developing countries. My question is this: if we are in Africa or other developing countries, they are more working very hard. For example, in Rwanda, we are working very hard to be the upcoming years, 2050 vision. We are building industries. Our population is increasing rapidly. Is not only in Rwanda, even in Africa. So how carbon credit will reduce climatic change, where upcoming or developing countries are working hard, industries, bringing some other things will contribute in protecting this atmosphere. Thank you.
I think I can allow you to answer some questions. We take 2 more questions, close this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Ikibazo cyabayeho, turi gukoresha ururimi rutari urwacu rw'icyongereza, reka mbivuge gutyo. Ndumva rero munyemereye nabivuga mu kuko majorite turi abanyarwanda, nabisobanura mu kinyarwanda kugira ngo birusheho kumvikana. Ba boss murabinyemereye. Carbon credit ni ikintu cyagiyeho, reka nyite ikintu bigendeye ku masezerano atandukanye, muzi za Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement yavuba ahangaha, abantu baricaye muzi ko target ari ukugabanya ubushyuhe, reka mbyite gutyo, ubushyuhe cyangwa se imihindagurikire y'ibihe. Noneho nk'uko uriya musore niyo nkuru yabibazaga, hanze hari amakampani cyangwa se industries z'amamodoka n'andi makampani yemitinga CO2 isa nkaho iri hejuru. Carbon credit rero uko ikora ni gutya, ni ukuvuga ngo ayo makampani CO2 yemitinga ibizwi, iba yarabaye quantified. Icyo ayo makampani akora ni ugufata amafaranga akishyura, niho ayo mafaranga azava, ntabwo ari amafaranga azava mu kirere, ni amafaranga azava mu makampani, ni amafaranga azava muri guverinoma ziriya zifite inganda nyinshi, noneho akishyura amakampani atera ibyo biti. Ntabwo ari ibiti gusa, ushobora no gukora biogaze. Biogaze nayo hari icyo ikora mu kureducinga climate change, sibyo? Noneho ayo makampani icyo akora ni iki, araza niba ufite hegitari 100 yenda za forest, izo hegitari 100 zibasha kuabsorbinga metric ton yenda 1000. It's just an assumption. Izi 1000 zihwanye niyo company nayo makampani yawe, yo akishyura ayo mafaranga, noneho akagura iki cyitwa ni nka certificate. Hari urwego rubishinzwe ruri certifiye ruza kuverifiya ko iyo carbon yemitinga. Ni ukuvuga ngo niba Volkswagen ni urugero, ubushize yasohoye amafaranga menshi igura carbon market credit, iyo iziguze ikazigura yenda na company ya Serije cyangwa y'undi muntu, bamuha amafaranga. Serije we icyo abaha ni certificate iriho iyi amount ya carbon agabanya, sibyo? Serije we akabona amafaranga. Carbon credit urebye niyo process, niyo kugurisha amount ya carbon iba reduced, sibyo? Ubwo navugaga ku makampani, noneho tujye ku bihugu. USA birazwi, hari umubare wa CO2 iba emitted bitewe n'inganda ziriyo, cyangwa se China cyangwa se ikindi gihugu. USA hari amafaranga igomba gushyira ku ruhande yo kugura umubare uhwanye n'iyo CO2 iba emitted n'inganda zayo. Hari ibyo bita compliance carbon credit market, hakaba niyo bita voluntary carbon credit market. Compliance ni ku rwego rw'ibihugu, voluntary ni ku rwego rwa company. Muri make iyo transaction ni kwigiye
yitwa period pay, uwanduza agomba kwishyura. Hakazamo ikindi kintu cyitwa payment for ecosystem services, ugira uruhare mu gufata neza ibidukikije agomba kubyungukiramo. Rero ikibazo kirimo nk'uko Serge yabivuze, tugomba kwihuta mu iterambere, kuko kugeza ubu uwishyura niwe ufite ubushobozi bwo gupima iyangano ya carbone. Nibo bafite ikoranabuhanga ryo kuvuga ngo ishyamba ryawe rifite ubushobozi bwo gufata carbone ivuye mu kirere ingana gutya, noneho turaguhaye amafaranga. Rero twe icyo twakwishyamba kugira ngo bazungukire muri carbon credit muri isoko rya carbone, twari dukwiye kumenya ngo natwe dushyireho izo application z'ikoranabuhanga dufashe abaturage be domene nshyashya y'imirimo, kugira ngo dufashe abaturage kubapimira nk'uko umuntu apima ubutaka, agapima ibishyimbo cyangwa ibigori abijyanye ku isoko kugira ngo batamuhenda, kugira ngo natwe serivisi dutanga zo kubungabunga ibidukikije twe kuzihendwaho muri iri soko rya carbone. Murakoze.
Thank you. I would allow only 2 questions, but Professor Nicholas also has a question. I think I have one question here and the second here. I'm very sorry for other people who have questions because of a matter of time. Unless we can live here at night and we don't want that again. Thank you.
Yes, Nicolas Sadler, UC Louvain. Could you firstly explain the national strategy regarding REDD+? That's an obligation stemming from the Warsaw Framework 2013 decisions by the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC. So when was the strategy adopted? How the strategy unfolds? What's the aim of the strategy? Then there were relevant questions regarding the contracts. So the contracts give rise to the issue of the ownership of the land, the ownership of the trees, because a tree, I don't know EU civil law, but in some legal regime, either the trees is incorporated to the land, but the tree, when it's cut, under the French civil tradition, is a meuble, whereas the land is an immeuble. And I know common law functions differently, but Rwanda still pertains to the French civil or the Belgian civil tradition, if I'm not wrong. So that's really important for lawyers. So it's an issue of legal certainty. So if a community wants to invest in planting 10, 20 hectares, with which body are they going to contractualize? So the contract, is it going to be concluded by the community, but is it the chief of the village or the representative of the village that are going to conclude the contract? And then with which body? Is it a private foreign companies, management investing? And then the third issues, you didn't mention any concrete case. Could you comment upon some concrete CDM or REDD+ case and the benefits that were obtained by the landowners or by the communities?
So next two questions, I need the people to be precise for the matter of time.
Sorry, my question has been asked.
So we press.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Felix Tuizer. I'm a student at University of Rwanda, and I have one question. Here we are in Symposium on the future of forest and the future sustainable of forest. The future of forest belongs on its sustainability. And nowadays, forest project took long time to be implemented and to get the result. I think this is the reason why different forest projects are being implemented by government and strong NGOs, others are rejected. So what and how do you help young generation who have ideas or projects to implement or keep it up so that they cannot reject or postpone their ideas? Also, I think 50% here we are students, and I would like to ask if you have different research projects in the forestry or conservation, you may include us so that we can be empowered as future experts. I have a suggestion also, is an engagement of discussion in our groups so that different experts in different sectors, we can brainstorm on different climate issues and get up different solutions or initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Byiringiro Emmanuel from University of Rwanda in forestry. So it's like a suggestion. I think these issues of carbon credit must be beyond the credit. It must be the human commitment, because maybe, take an example. If everyone if everyone is committed to plant one tree, maybe let's take an example, like if you plant one avocado, it has the capacity to capture like about 21 kilogram of carbon dioxide per year. So let's imagine if maybe a certain number of people plant one tree in their home, how much carbon dioxide can be sequestrated per year. So let's take globally. So I can say that everyone must be committed to plant even single tree, because if we go through in the carbon credit, maybe those people who are having small land, they will not plant trees to capture those carbon dioxide because they will not get incentive. But if he committed to plant one tree in their house, in their home garden, we just reduce some amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Thank you.
So because he was give us a suggestion, let's hear one question.
Okay, thank you so much for the great presentation, and I would love to ask this kind of question to the people who have been here, plus the district officers that are present in the house. Then I have a question, firstly to the speaker of today. You brought the system or the issue of this selling a carbon which is being stored by trees that you planted. Then don't you think there will be a time and people make it a business as long as it is actually bringing a lot of money, so that people should engage in it very much more than it has to be, and to the extent it goes against agriculture, and we do understand the role of agriculture. So coming back to the question that I want to ask to the people from the district officers, like yesterday we had a lawyer presenting us a law that is established to protect a forest, and we've seen that the reason why that we protect forest is that we do understand the role of the forest to our human life. We do understand the role of forest to the health, to the biodiversity, to the living things, right? Then, now, I want you to understand that this goes hand in hand with how educated somebody is. So, if a person is not really educated enough, so to mean that that person is not going to conserve the forest because he or she is not really educated enough. His or her low level of education is not really enough to do so. Then, if that person is now going to be treated in terms of penalties, in terms of fines that are going to be applied to him or her, don't you think that it will be better if they go for further or mass training or mass mobilization, so that people should be aware of the use and the role of the forest, instead of treating them in terms of penalties and fines? So those was my question, and I thank you so very much. I raised my case.
I'll give you two comments on it. First of all, let's take this carbon market as a new approach to help people to conserve the nature. This is the one-off solution. The second thing that I need to say is, the nature tolerates some errors, but there is time where we must give you what? You need to understand this concept. Ni ukuvuga isi cyangwa se ibidukikije, iyo ukomeje kubyangiriza biragutegereza umunsi umwe bikaguhana bigihana. Ibyo rero turi guhunga no kugira ngo duhunge ibihano bizata. A simple example, like 10 years back, when Gishwati was destroyed, you know the story. Do you know how many people were dying with Gishwati issues? Up to now, last year, do you know the severe story? Do you know the severe story near to Rubavu, those areas? I think we don't need other training. The nature have enough element to train everyone, even those small children at primary school. We have the nice schools there with nice teaching materials, with everything to teach us. Now, what we need to do is to put more effort in those environmental conservation. This means what? If even someone, I say, okay, I have my forest, don't take it as a favor. No, you have also the benefit, because if you don't have forest, you have another, the opposite of those what we have. Now, finally, the issue, I think, here we come in, the financial. Why? I come in Rwanda kugira ngo tuyumve neza. Umuntu ufite ishyamba akajya gusaba inguzanyo muri banki, barongera bakamusaba ingwate. Turi nk'abasaba muri district ngaba baratubwira, ko mfite ishyamba mumpe credit kubera ko mfite ishyamba, ngo yango tuyindi ngwate yo kuba ingwate yari ryashyamba, mbaho inzu yanjye kugira ngo ndere icyo mumva ari igisobanuro bifite. Kubera iki inzu yubatse ahantu hatoya bayiha agaciro cyane kurusha umuntu ufite ishyamba ry'indurusi zivuye akagera hirya. Noneho abantu bagatangira kuvuga ati noneho rero nibyo mwirirwa mumbwira ngo ndere ibiti byinshi ngo byinjiza amafaranga n'iki, ntabyo numva kuko n'ubundi simfata inguzanyo kubera byo. Abantu bo muri finance rero ntabwo babyumva, ntabwo bumva ishyamba nk'ahari ikintu. Niyo baje barakubwira ngo ese ngo byose mu gitondo ritema, ngo wazamenya gute ko ijyangwate yawe gihari? Sibyo? Ubuse muri bari gisobanuro, nta gisobanuro kirimo. Bagombye guha agaciro amashamba kugira ngo n'ufite ishyamba nafata inguzanyo bayimuhe kandi bamuha amafaranga akereye kuko afite umutungo utimukanwa. Siko mwego mu byumva, nuko bigomba kugenda. Noneho rero icyo mugenzi wacu yarabajije cya nyuma, ntabwo ko abantu bagira bifata nkaho n'indamuka nteye amashyamba ndi gufasha abandi, ukibagiwe ko nawe uri kwifasha kubera ko nawe ushobora kugiraho ingaruka. Ikintu cya kabiri, mwebwe hari umuntu wagize kubaza ngo urubyiruko risaki kubafasha. Ikibazo dufite, atanze urugero rwiza, ibi byose tubyigira hano. Sinzi aho mutuye murambabarira, hari abatuye aho batatera igiti, ego nta kundi byagenda, kandi niho murwanira. Mwebwe mukunda kuba ahantu badatera ibiti, nyine hari ama etage, ahantu badatera ibiti, badahinga ibirayi, aho mwaho niho mukeneye kuba. Ariko uramutse ahandi mutuye noneho batera ibiti, ukagenda iwanyu ukavuga ati mwacyo turi abana bane, ukuvuga buri mwana afite icye giti, n'ababyeyi niba bombi bakihari dufite ubwo biti 6 iwanyu. Mubare ingo ziri iwanyu mu mudugudu, buri rugo rufite ibiti 6. Uzi ko ntanzo wabona abantu batuye mu ishyamba, ariko ntabyo mwakora. Niki kuri ndabo mwazitera da. Hanyuma the last one, umuntu abantu batuye za Kagano mu Kinigiriya bazambwire nzaje kubereka umudamu wakoze ikintu cyiza kirantangaza. Yateye avoka zirakura, nyine inzu ni nkaho iri mu ishyamba. Arangije munsi ye za avoka ahororera inkoko, tagisika cyazibona cyanyura he, nta nubwo kimenya ibiri kubera hari hasi. Ugasanga afite nk'amasake nka 20 munsi yavo. Niba yarangije amashuri menshi na primaire nako ntayo yarangije ngira, ariko mwese ahanga mwagenda kabaha amasomo mugataha muvuga ati kwishuri harya aya mafaranga twayishoye kumara iki, kuko ntacyo tumara isi. Ariko dore umuntu umudamu usanzwe we arabyumva, yarabyumvise impamvu igiti ushobora kugikoreramo ibintu byinshi icyarimwe. Sarura avoka hejuru n'inkoko ziwe ziri hasi, hanyuma korora. Ikibazo nyine haracyari iyo myumvire. Mwebweho uko imyaka ishira niko mwumva nabi. Ejo babahaye urugero, cyane cyane igitsina gore mwihangana, ni mwebwe ba mbere ahubwo namwe bajya babishuza amafaranga ya carbone. Urajya kwambara utekereze ngo yanga urukweto narigiye kwambara ngo ntabwo rusa n'iyerena, ngo ntabwo rusa n'iki ngiki, nukuvuga kapo kashaje ngomba akandi kajyanye n'uyu mwenda, none uyu mwenda azawujya. Ibyo bintu byose mugura, hanyuma se utekereza ko iyo bishaje bijya namwe bafungurire konti mujye mwishura amafaranga, mwanduza ikirere.
Thank you. Let me ask the speaker to be quick for answering the question, then we go with the second presenter.
So ndumva byinshi babivuzeho banabisubije. Icyo nagira ngo mbereke, ukeneye amakuru yisumbuyeho namwe mugomba gusoma, mufite responsibility yo gusoma no kumenya. Hari website iriho uburyo ushobora kubona amadokima atandukanye, guidance for application for the project on carbon credit. Ibyo usabwa byose biriho, guidance zose ziriho. Yitwa wandikemo climatechange.gov.rwa. .gov.rwa. Yeah, you have the guideline. Hari na dokima yakozwe na Rema, nayo mushobora kuyishaka, on the guidance on how guidance and direction of carbon credit market. Ni dokima yakozwe na Rema, nayo mushobora kuyishaka online, yabafasha kubyumva neza. Niba hari projet ushaka gukora, amabwiriza bakakwereka ibyo ukurikiza, then ugasubmitinga, nawe ukazagira amahirwe yo kuba muri bamwe basarura ku matunda ya carbon credit market. Ndumva aricyo nari kongeraho. Murakoze. So since Nicholas is back, let me try to respond to his question. He was asking about when the framework was signed. It was last year in December. So it is still in a young stage, if I may say so. But we have different guidelines and how people, for example, the guidance, how they may apply. And also we have different green growth strategies, and the different legal document on how those local communities will also have to benefit from the activities. For instance, if we plant in radical terraces, we are valorizing the radical terraces, we are planting different agroforest trees, how we group them in sort of cooperatives and try to purchase those credit for the carbon market. We are still in a young stage, but there is a different document and this different directive, and some ministries and institutions such as Rwanda Environmental Management Authority, which will follow the process of the carbon credit market. I think I tried to respond. Yes?
I think it will be interesting that you provide some illustrations about contracts that have been concluded either by private owners or by communities. And the question is whether is it the landowner or the private community concluding the contract, and what provide for the contract, what are the obligations. So I imagine this kind of long-term obligation, because as you stressed, these trees will take 30 years to grow, and so the carbon capture goes stage by stage. So it's really the mechanism that touches upon the right of property.
I wish to compliment, for now, the government signed the agreement, but they're still looking for the good companies which can come and have an agreement with the local communities. But the problem is that there's some big interaction between the buyers and the community. They have to be the government, because the government think and wonder that the local communities, they didn't know much about carbon credit and how the measures will be strict, that it's good. So that for now there will be contract, but the project is still the pilot in the 3 districts for now, not around the Rwanda. In North they start with Gakenke district and the Rulindo, and the Takwan part for South Rwanda. So they will start with government's forest to see how it works, and then after they can release with the local communities. Thank you so much. So it will be the communities who will sign the contract, but the community will start with, if you have like 10 hectare or 1 hectare, it's not all the communities who will be allowed to sign the contract. There will be some measures that you really have, but for now the contract is not clear. That's why for the pilot they will start with the government land to see pilot to 2 years or 3 years, see how it is work with those abroad companies, and then after they will enter the communities. The private investors from Europe. But for me, when I was in the training, there was a UK company called CO2 Company Africa. So it's the one who want to start those projects in Rwanda. We have a training with NGOs who are doing restoration, private sectors, governments, to start with the pilot, but still now they still have complicated with the measures or other things, not yet to start as real. That's why the rector said that there is those agreements, but there is no place where you can go saying that this carbon credits are already starting. So there is still many companies who applied to do those things, but no one is accepted to start the project. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next speaker is Nicholas.
Hello. Yes. That's of importance. It will be the number of trees that will have to be planted. However, the regulation is unclear regarding the methodology that will have to be implemented in order to foster native trees plantation. I mentioned yesterday at really the end of my speech regarding CDMs and REDD+, that the European Union has been adopting regulation on the land use change, and forestry. So it's a bit different from the RLOF model of the United Nations. The sectors of agriculture and forestry must contribute to achieving the minus 55% emissions target compared to the 90 levels by 2030, so in 6 years from now. And the change that occurred in the implementation of this Green Deal is that the 2018 regulation that provide for a target of 225 million tons has been increased up to 310 million tons CO2. That's still a small number. Belgium emits somewhat 90 million tons CO2 per year. France emits about 550 millions. So all in all, this figure does not match probably the need regarding the observation of the extra CO2 being emitted. But nevertheless, this is an ambitious target, and both ministers on the one side and the European Parliament MPs agreed upon increasing this target. So that will entail modification, a greater level of extensification of productions of wood, and that goes hand in hand with enhancing the biodiversity in the EU. I said a few words on the CITES Convention. I propose that I would skip that to focus on the 2023 regulation that's of bigger interest. I imagine that Rwanda export very few wildlife and very few plants to the EU, so Rwanda is not really concerned, but countries such as Cameroon that Cameroon exports rosewood to the EU, Madagascar export also and exports rosewood. So these countries are much more concerned by the implementation of the CITES Convention by the EU, and there are difference. You will look at my slides. The Annex B that reflects Annex 2 in the EU encompass a broader number of plants, a broader number of species, and the obligations are much more stringent than under CITES convention. So again, the EU tries to, when it implements these international agreements, to move further, to be stricter. Now I come to more global issues, the import of harvested timber trees from countries, mostly tropical countries. And somewhat 10 years ago, the EU adopted the FLEGT action plan, so this forest law enforcement, governance and trade. So you remember we mentioned these three concepts time and again, law enforcement, governance and trade. So the issue is to regulate trading in timber by requiring a higher environmental standard, higher legality standard. So the FLEG action plan is a soft law instrument, it just is the plan, and that has been fleshed out, that has been implemented by two binding instruments. Firstly, Cameroon or Ivory Coast or Ghana can conclude an agreement with the EU, putting into place this FLEG limit. And that has been implemented beside the voluntary agreement by an EU timber regulation in 2010. So the plan starts a process that places emphasis on governance reform. So the idea is that the conclusion of the VAP agreement with Ivory Coast, with Ghana, will lead to the improvement of forestry governance. It's a bit similar with REDD+. Under the Warsaw 2013 framework, the state, being party to the REDD+, is obligated to draw up its strategy, and that's what Rwanda did, ousted from the forest, and then they will destroy the unprotected forest next door, and so there is no win-win situation. And here it's about capacity building, developing multilateral cooperation, thanks to this. So the voluntary agreements create a legally binding obligation for Ghana or for Ivory Coast to implement a licensing scheme. So the national administration, the Ghanaian administration, has to mark the timber. So probably having seen, every log is being marked with a number. The log must be tracked down from the forest to the harbor of Accra, for instance, or of the harbor of Abidjan. And so this is done in order to avoid fraud, in order to avoid corruption. So the aim is to ensure that only legally exploited timber is imported in the EU. So if the license scheme has been bypassed, the timber cannot be imported. It will be blocked in the European harbor. The agreements also provide for due diligence. I will come back to these issues of due diligence. I already mentioned due diligence yesterday. And due diligence obligations are placed on the operators, so on the importers of the logs. And so the European companies importing the logs will have to carry out a risk assessment, and in case they assess that there is a risk of fraud, they are obligated to adopt risk mitigation measures. And the risk mitigation measure that can be to terminate the contract, because you are importer, so you conclude a contract with the administration or the private Ghanaian company that's going to export the log to your country. And so risk mitigation is really to diminish the risk of fraud, of corruption, of trees being harvested illegally. As I stressed, this is not going to be controlled by the European Commission from Brussels. These rules have been to be implemented by the German administration, by the French administration, by the Portuguese administration, so that the states are involved in implementing correctly, in looking after the importers,
to assess whether they've been carrying out their risk assessment, and in case of a risk, whether they've been implementing risk management. So there are a number of countries, so a number of voluntary partnerships agreements have been concluded, not with Rwanda because you don't export trees to Europe. It's Ghana, Congo, Cameroon, Liberia, SCCER, Indonesia, Vietnam, Honduras, Guyana. Besides, you have Council regulations of 2005 that really implements authorization scheme, and that's parallel to the different agreements that have been concluded so far with this country. So, that being said, many experts, many NGOs have been emphasizing the weakness of the FLEG model. Firstly, the conclusion of this agreement is voluntary. So a number of countries exporting tropical woods to Europe did not conclude this agreement. For instance, Malaysia is not a party to the agreement, or Vietnam is not a party. And only among these 15 countries, only Indonesia is really in the process of implementing, of operating the FLEG licensing scheme. So it's very time consuming, it's voluntary, and it takes time to put in place a good governance structure. So it means that so far only 3% of the timber imports to the EU is covered by a genuine operational licensing scheme. So in light of these difficulties, within the framework of the Green Deal, the European Union adopted this 2013-1115 Forest Risk Commodities Regulation. So I will discuss briefly the legal basis, the scope, so which commodities, which products are falling within the scope of the regulation, what are the regulatory obligations placed upon the private parties but also placed upon the national administration, and the manner in which this regulation will be enforced. So contrary to the existing regulation that I just explained, and I just stressed the weakness, nobody knows whether this new scheme will outperform, whether it's going to bring an added value to the previous scheme, because it's not yet fully into force. So this regulation is a genuine environmental regulation. It aims not at fostering trade, it aims at protecting the environment, the forestry environment being in Europe, because European traders are also subject to this obligation because there is no discrimination, but it applies also to trading activities taking place abroad. So it required the involvement of the Parliament and the Council of Ministers. So the objectives that have been pursued by the EU lawmaker is to reduce the impact of EU consumption on production and deforestation worldwide, be it in Europe, be it outside of Europe, to minimize the consumption of products coming from supply chains associated with forest destruction or deforestation, and to increase the demand in Europe for legally products, but also products that have been sustainably harvested, that do not lead to forest degradation or forest or deforestation. So in contrast to the 2005 regulation that's only reckoning upon legality, a legality criteria, in addition to legality, there is a sustainability criterion. So it means that not only the wood or the soybean or the cattle meat being placed on the European market must be authorized, must be complied with national legislation, but in the process of producing the cattle meat or in producing the soybean or in producing the cocoa, there should be no forest encroachment. So it's really a new step. It's a bit like the nature restoration law. There is nothing similar in USA or in Japan or in China. And so many of these new acts are very innovative. So the question on everybody's lips is what at stake. And on the one hand, there are commodities, on the other hand, there are products. The commodities so far are few. It's cattle, but it's broad range, cattle. And we stress that cattle ranching, and you stressed that also, sir, is leading to deforestation and also emissions of methane. Cocoa, coffee, that's of interest to Rwanda. Palm oil, I mentioned the case brought by Indonesia and Malaysia against the EU before the WTO. Rubber, soya or soybean, and finally wood, whatever type of product. It can be a log, it can be a furniture, it can be a wooden structure. In addition, there are the products, and the products are listed in Annex 1. And so these are the products that have been fed or they have been made using the relevant commodity. So let's imagine paper is falling within the scope because you use pulp in order to produce paper. So it's a pulp mill process that's going to produce the toilet paper or the student papers. So all of the papers that you have around you went through a pulp mill. So it means that we do export a lot of paper from Brazil. These papers are subject to the obligations stemming from this regulation because they've been produced for wood, and wood is a commodity subject. So here are some of my pictures. On the left hand you have the rubber plantation, middle range you have oil palm plantation and a cocoa plantation. Again, the palm oil and finally rubber plantation. So all these commodities are subject to the obligations encapsulated in the regulation. So to be a bit more precise, I brought a map to highlight the trade relationship between Europe and the other continent. Cattle meat, so the main exporter, of course, is the United States because they have these huge ranches in Kansas, in Nebraska, in the Sun Belt. Then Brazil is fairly unpopulated, but it has huge. Interesting enough, China, Argentina, of course, a lot of cattle ranches. Trade streams encapsulate in the direct. The case of cocoa is easier because cocoa is produced mostly in Ghana, in Ivory Coast, to a lower extent to in Cameroon and in Brazil, and then the other countries export really a few amounts. And so I did organize a full meeting with Cape Coast University in Ghana in April, in English of course, regarding the implementation of this regulation with respect to cocoa. Coffee, here we clearly see that the main exporters are Brazil, followed by Vietnam, Colombia, of course, which is a very mountainous country, so which is more suitable for coffee production, Indonesia, and then with respect to Africa, Ethiopia. And then Rwanda is not listed among the five first exporting countries, but I don't know in which rank lies Rwanda. But of course, if you look at the map, but it will be mostly Western Africa with Cameroon, Nigeria, and Ghana, and in the Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Industrial roundwoods, things get much more complicated because, again, the main production of roundwood comes from temperate forests or boreal forests in North America and Russia. So you will have USA, Canada, and Russia that are endowed with huge forest tracts. And then, as I mentioned previously in my earlier speech, Brazil is the first exporter of tropical woods to the EU. So these are the commodities and the products stemming from these commodities. Then there are the operators that are subject to the obligations. So with the operator, it's a natural or legal person who, in course of a commercial activity, so it will be a corporation, a company, an undertaking, place on the market the relevant product or export this product. And so there is issue what's placing on the market. So you see the lawyers, they define every concept in order to enhance legal certainty. So it means that undertakings not located in Congo, in Brazil, but the undertakings based in Europe importing the products and the commodities are subject to the EU obligation. From a legal point of view, the EU cannot place obligation upon a Rwandese company. But the importers is concluding a contract with the Rwandese export to the EU. So it means that you will explain that the obligation placed upon the European importers will have a consequence upon the contractor, the Rwandese company exporting to the European company the coffee. It makes sense? Yes? It makes sense to everybody? Okay. So, as I explained, the regulation is ambitious on the account that it departs from the genuine legality criteria. Legality is the speed limit in Rwanda. If you drive above 30 kilometers an hour, you commit a misdemeanor and you can be fined. If you drive on the national highway above 50, you are also likely to be fined by the police. Okay? That's the legality criteria. Here, the sustainability criteria is being added to the legality criteria. And so it requires that the suppliers of the commodities and the products, so the toilet paper coming from Brazil, must demonstrate that the origin of the toilet paper is not leading to either deforestation or forest degradation. So it means that the whole value chain is concerned by the obligation that are placed upon the importers, because the importers must secure that there is no risk upon regarding forest encroachment in the value chain. So the whole regulation unfolds around the prohibition. So only the products or the commodities that are deforestation free, that have been produced in accordance with the relevant national legislation, so the criterion of legality, so the first criterion is sustainability, here's legality, and that there is a due diligence statement from the economic operator importing the product. So the question is what legality criterion? So there's been ample political discussions in Brussels between the MPs, between the ministers, and so the criteria have been expanded. So an important right is the land use right. So it's not only property rights, and then I asked the questions regarding communities. So I don't know your legal system, but imagine that there is a certain level of complexity and that you have also use rights that are conferred to communities to exploit either public land or land that belongs to the community. Environmental protection obligations, so nature protection, biodiversity protection, forest-related rules regarding forest management, forest conservation, wood harvesting, third-party rights, so the fact that you have a community living next to a forest and the forest will be destroyed, and so the community is going to lose the shade from the forest, is going to lose the ecosystemic service from the forest. That must be taken into consideration. Human rights, and then the rights of the indigenous people that I mentioned with respect to REDD+ yesterday. And finally, I discussed time and again, I mentioned time and again, fraud, anti-corruption, the correct implementation of custom regulation. So that means that the importer, the Belgian or the Dutch importer, major importers of tropical wood, will have to pay a consultant to assess that in Brazil or in Cameroon or in Gabon or in Congo, all these legal obligations are correctly implemented. In addition to the absence of a risk of deforestation or forest degradation. So this is a big business for a consultant, because it ranges from custom duties, from custom control to labor rights, basic human rights, and all the sets of environmental rules. So the question, what means deforestation free? That's defined. That's the products have not been made or have not been produced on land that has been subject to deforestation after 31st December 2020. So they put the date of 2020 in order, because many exporters knew that the regulation will be entered in force, so it was lively political discussions, and that was done in order to avoid that the last moment they will destroy all the forests. To say, okay, the obligation do not apply for us because there is no forest. It's a bit like we do with heritage buildings, when we have medieval buildings from the 13th, 14th centuries, when there is a proposal to classify the building to maintain the heritage, the proposal enters into force. So although the decision is not yet into force, the proposal has a force to avoid that the owner destroys the building, and to say there is no more historical value or there is no more aesthetic value. So that's why they placed the date in 2020. And B is about the wood. And so what are the obligations? This is about due diligence. And so the due diligence must be implemented before placing the commodities or the products on the EU market, or to export a European product to another part of the world. There are differences between small and medium companies. So small and medium companies are companies employing less than 50 workers. So the obligations vary according to the size of the companies, and for smaller companies it's much more difficult to implement this. Again, it's the same issues with REDD+ implementation. It's easier for a forestry administration that owns thousands of square kilometers of woodland to apply to conclude a contract regarding the conservation of the woodland. In the case of a community owning only 50 hectares of land, this is bloody complicated, because there are all the obligations of monitoring that are attached to the contract. So the importers will have to submit a statement. The statement has to be sent to the national authority, not to the Commission, so to the French authority, to the Belgian authority. And the statement contains all the information: where is the product coming from, where it has been processed. In case of the coffee produced in your country, on which land it has been produced, and which has been the value chain. And so the information or the data being gathered by the importers leads to the obligation to carry out a risk assessment in order to determine the risk. And in case of the discovery of a specific risk, mitigation measures must be adopted. So in the risk assessments, given the high complexity of the scheme, the Commission is going to adopt a list, a bit similar to the illegal and unregulated fisheries system, where you have a white classification, an orange classification, and then a black classification. And so, in case of your country, I can imagine if there is a proper forestry policy if projects are well maintained, if the land is clearly delineated, it might be possible that Rwanda be classified in the white list. A country that's partly at war, RDC, issues are much more complex when it comes to human rights, to labor rights, in particular in northern Kivu. I was still reading earlier this morning books about what's happening in Kivu. The situation is absolutely chaotic. So there will be, it's likely that RDC will be classified on the blacklist. So of course, the fact for the country to be listed in the blacklist entails consequences that the level of risk assessment will be much higher than for a country classified in the white list. And so the Commission must adopt this list. So far the list has not yet been adopted, but the Commission must take into account the prevalence of deforestation, so that the fact of the matter is that there is high rate deforestation these last 3 years in RDC, the complexity of the supply chain, and the possible corruption. So RDC has a very high level of corruption, as you are aware. It's with Chad, with some other countries, it's listed among the worst countries plagued by corruption. So these criteria, the implementation of these criteria, could lead to classify RDC as a blacklist. So there is a lot of lobbying taking place in Brussels. So you have lawyers, consultants working for different tropical countries, trying to influence the Commission, trying to plead the cause of the foreign countries. You have also the embassies trying to argue that their own country abide by these criteria. And so if you look at the low risk, so there must be a state control, but the state control applies only to 1% of the operator, so it's really minimum threshold, whereas on the blacklist, the national administration must control 9% of the operators to assess whether the supply chain is correct. In case the risk is obvious, the importers must require more information, must conduct additional survey audits, must perhaps send the consultant in the middle of Brazil or in the middle of Congo, must perhaps work on capacity buildings to avoid the fraud or the corruption. So this goes much beyond the legality criterion that I was discussed, that was embedded in 2005 regulation. Of course, many foreign countries, many third countries are quite upset because they claim, okay, the EU mingles into our own business. We accept the criterion of legality, but this is a sustainability criteria we don't want to do. So there is an opposition between the wish of the European consumers to be responsible, not to contribute to forest degradation or deforestation in eating chocolate or in eating biscuits or in sitting on a wooden chair made of teak, and then the wishes of the exporting countries say, okay, our supply chain will be subject to all these obligations, and that's going to be complicated. So now, 29 June of 2023, I was finishing my exams in Brussels. Deregulation entered fully into force, but a number of provisions will apply only at the end of this year. So it's not yet fully into force. So the EU lawmaker has been giving time to the companies, to the foreign countries to adjust to the new obligations. So, of course, the state authorities have to conduct investigation, have to control the harbors, have to control whether the statements have been forwarded to them, and they have to report to the they have to forward to the European Commission a yearly report regarding the implementation. So there is really, the European Commission is a bit the guardian and is going to look at the ways in which every country is going to implement the regulation. In case the operators do not play by the game, that's always a risk, the state must provide for penalties, and so the breach of the regulations, of the obligations stemming from the regulation, must be prosecuted, and that can lead to criminal consideration. Of course, you are aware of the custom duties, so all the imports go through harbor or through airports, where you have custom officials, and so these custom authorities will be obligated to look whether the cocoa or the timber coming from Brazil complies with the regulations, and that will to be done in cooperation with the environmental administration. So to conclude, to sum up, this is really one of the upshots of the European Green Deal. This regulation has been pushed by major NGOs such as Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, WWF. So I imagine that without the push of all these big NGOs, the Commission won't have been acting, because it's a kind of murky waters. It's a bit complicated, uncharted waters from a legal point of view. In addition, there's been a petition signed by more than 1 million citizens. So the EU has 500 million citizens, so one person over 500 signed that petition asking the Commission to regulate the supply chains of the Commission. So there is going to be, it's likely that there will be state that will lodge complaint before the World Trade Organization, like the complaint that has been brought before the WTO with respect to the obligations regarding the biofuels and the palm oil. But that's going to take a long place. So this regulation is already in place. So hopefully I succeed in 1 day and a half to cover a big number of EU regulations. So you might be surprised by the level of complexity, the level of technicalities, but I have to confess that I've been rather general so far. So lawyers usually have to really assess the scope of that very specific obligation. That's another story. But the idea is to convey the image that the EU wishes to be a forerunner, and that's why, thanks to this EU fund, that I cooperate with the two NGOs to explain what's going on and to learn what's being done in your country with respect to reforestation, afforestation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you for audience. Help me to thank all the speakers, Nicholas and Yacinthe, for a great presentation. For the matter of time, I'd like to suggest whether we can go straight to the lunch, or if there is 2 questions or 1 question. There is 1 question online. I think we can take.
So it will be ready at 3 sharp. Like this, everybody has 1 hour to relax and to have lunch. That would be an idea. But I can answer quickly.
Okay. Yes, this afternoon agenda was, as it was planned, it was to have Godfrey as a speaker. But because of the matter of time, I think we had also 1 speaker from land. but for the matter of time, we shall see how we can make it as quick as possible. Because you see, we skipped many round tables, so just to try to catch up with all presentations. At least we have to close at the 4:30. Thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch. I think we can allow one question online, then before we. Yeah, there is a question on YouTube from Basi. He asked, what approach have you found effective in managing public perception and maintaining credibility? Yes, the question is, he asked what approaches you have found effective in managing public perception and maintaining credibility.
So, I'm sorry, with respect to the legality criteria, the European Parliament has been requesting to the ministers, so it's a process of negotiation. On the one hand, you have the 27 ministers, and then you have the 720 MPs. And so there are the issues of number of rights, labor rights, third parties' rights, that can be the use rights of the neighbor, the property rights, but you have also land use rights. So there is no issue of participations, but I imagine that in case communities are deprived of their rights, they will get the support of NGOs that will convey a claim to the state authorities where the import is taking place and saying, okay, there is a problem there. So now there are already some, the German and French legislation providing for due diligence, and NGOs have been bringing claims before the national courts, requesting the courts to prohibit the French company or the German companies to import beef on the account that the cattle ranching taking place abroad is leading to deforestation. So they came with the evidence, and so that requires that the evidence is coming from local NGOs or affected people by the deforestation process. But it's not a planning, so this is really regulating products and commodities being traded. So unlike the Red Plus strategy and the framework 2013 Warsaw framework provide for participation, in particular of indigenous people, there it makes sense to have participation. Here, in this process of regulating trade, you cannot have participation. But with respect to the legality criterion, a number of rights, so the consultants intervening for the importers who will have to assess whether the cattle ranching or the soybean production is not hampering, is not undermining be it labor rights, be it property rights. And that's a big task. That can be, if you see the soybean fields in Brazil, it's square kilometers. It's very different from the fields I've seen in Rwanda so far. But I propose to answer other questions because this is really one of the regulations that's the most touchy. And in Ghana, we had really cocoa exporter companies, managers of companies. The whole administration came to Cape Coast to attend the seminar, and they had really many questions because they are directly impacted because they are the major exporter. But, so it's a bit disappointing that you told me that you have been in contact with different companies and they didn't see the interest. But they are directly concerned by because they will have to report to the importers in Germany, in France, in Belgium.
Thank you so much. We are closing now, so let's go to the lunch. Just to manage the time, then we will be receiving Jean Godefroy online at the 3 sharp. Thank you.